Hello, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for being here. If we haven't met yet, my name is Rebecca. I'm a licensed therapist, and I specialize in complex trauma. And in this video today, I'm going to go through 3 of the characters from Ginny and Georgia, and we're going to look at how their complex trauma that's revealed in the show leads them to these mental health symptoms. What I love about the show Ginny and Georgia is that they did a really great job of having these the characters are all struggling with different mental health challenges, and they did a great job of showing us what was going on in their homes and in their relationship with their parents that accurately depict how we would see in the real world, leading to these symptoms that we're seeing in them. So I'm going to go through in this video Max, Marcus, and Abby. This video is not going to be about the characters Ginny and Georgia, just because they're very complex. If you'd like me to do a video about Ginny and Georgia, please let me know in the comments. If I get enough comments wanting that, I will take the time to do that. But today we're going to go through Max, Marcus, and Abby because their characters are also extremely relatable. There's a lot of people struggling in the same ways as these 3 characters, and I feel like this could be helpful. My hope here is that if you see yourself in any of these characters, if you see yourself similar, so Max is dealing with a lot of anxiety, some ADHD symptoms, and some OCD symptoms. Or Marcus is really struggling with depression and alcohol abuse, and Abby is really struggling with an eating disorder. If you see yourself in any of these characters, my hope is that this helps you a little bit more of your self-understanding, as well as, and maybe most importantly, self-compassion for why you might be struggling in this way, and hopefully an idea of how to move forward and help in your own healing process. If you're interested in furthering your healing process, I do have a mini course called The Roots of Healing. It's linked down below, so you can check that out. It's only $27. But here we are in today's video. I'm going to go through these characters, and I'm going to start off with Max. A lot of people related to Max's character. So we have an adolescent girl who is very deeply feeling. She has a lot of emotions. She deeply cares and loves other people. And she's very extroverted, has a lot of energy, a lot of personality, a lot of feelings. And in Ginny and Georgia, and especially in season 3, we see her really struggling with anxiety and then some ADHD symptoms and some OCD symptoms. We also see her struggle socially because of all of the overwhelm of emotion that's going on inside of her. So I'm going to be showing you some clips, and then we're going to be talking through a little bit about them. So I'm going to start off with a clip right now, and then I'll talk about why this is significant. Okay, so I recorded this entire video reacting to these scenes, went to upload it, and unfortunately YouTube is flagging this as copyrighted content. So I am re-recording the part where I would be reacting to a scene, and I'm going to tell you the exact timestamp of the scene if you wish to look it up, and if not, I'm going to explain what happens in the scene and then cut back to the original video. This isn't as great as it was, but hopefully it's still good enough for you to get that understanding of these characters, and most importantly, a deeper understanding of yourself or a loved one who can relate to these characters. But it will be a bit odd. I'm just going to name that when I cut back, you're going to see me as I'm reacting to just watching the scene. So bear with me with the clunkiness, and let's take it from here. So this first scene was a flashback scene, and it is episode 9 at about the 31-minute mark. And what happens in this scene is the girls, Abby, Max, and Nora are they're preparing for a lemonade stand, and they made a dance to go along with it. Abby's dad stops by. Abby's so excited to see him, and then asks if they can perform the dance for him. He says yes. He and Ellen sit down to watch the dance. The girls begin the dance, and Ellen talks while they're performing and asks Abby's dad, "How's Nancy?" And Max stops and says, look at what exactly she says. Max says, "Mom, we're performing." And Ellen kind of does like, "Oh, okay." And the girls start over, And quickly again, Ellen talks to Abby's dad and says, how was the trip to Rome? At this point, Max says, Mom, we worked really hard on this. A very healthy protest. And Ellen says, don't have a tantrum. Max gets upset and says, I'm not, and runs off. Okay. So this scene is really important because what we see is that Max is really excited to show her mom and the other parents that are there this dance that her and her friends have been working on. And the parents agree to watch the dance. As they start doing the dance, Ellen, Max's mom, starts talking to Abby's dad. Max interrupts, asking her to pay attention, and then it happens again, and she's protesting, saying, Mom, we worked really hard on this. Now, this protest is absolutely okay. It's really healthy, actually. There's an agreement that's being broken, and it would be painful to not have that attention when the other person has agreed to watch and you're proud of what you're showing them, and especially in the child-parent dynamic. Developmentally, the child needs to feel that the parent is excited and proud of them for this thing that they've worked on. And so Max has a very developmentally appropriate protest of, hey, we've worked really hard on this. And then her mom says, don't have a tantrum. And this broke my heart for Max because in this moment, what would have been appropriate here is for Ellen to say something like, I'm so sorry. I do really want to watch this dance. Please begin again. And then for them to do the dance and then for her to like celebrate it and, be excited about it. But instead, when she says don't have a tantrum, this is actually, it's shaming and it's gaslighting to Max about what's happening because she's not having a tantrum. She's having very appropriate feelings and then her feelings are getting shamed. And we know that she has a lot of feelings. And so what happens in families like this when the healthy protest of emotions is not allowed and there's no space for them to be received and support around them is that kids learn that my feelings aren't safe here and they feel shame about their feelings. And so two things happen. One, they don't learn how to be with their feelings. They don't learn how to manage this frustration, right? So as Max grows up, if she was taught how to manage this frustration as she gets older and interrupted, she would be able to stay more composed and say, excuse me, we were performing, can you please pay attention? It wouldn't be stuff that was like, hey, that big protest, it would die down because she would have help on how to be with it. But in addition to that, now when she has any of these big emotions, it's gonna be enmeshed with shame. It's gonna get confused for shame. And this creates a lot of anxiety in people because we naturally have emotions. That's just a part of being human. And if a child feels an emotion, feels like it's not safe to express the emotion and feels shame around it, then there's a lot of anxiety because we can't stop that emotion. So we just start running from the emotion. And some people like Max who are more extroverted, it becomes more of this bubbly anxiety that we see in her, where then her emotions are overflowing and they come onto her friends and anyone who's around because she doesn't know how to contain them. She doesn't know how to be with them. And then Marcus goes the other way. And I'm going to go into Marcus in a little bit, but Marcus goes inwards and just pushes them away. And so this was just, and I am assuming here, I want to definitely make sure I name that, I'm assuming that this moment is a snapshot of a dynamic that would happen quite often. So if this was a one-time thing, it wouldn't traumatize a kid. It's traumatizing and harmful when it happens on a regular basis, when anytime there's a protest or sad feelings, that they're being shamed and told to just stop without any understanding or compassion or recognition from the parents. So that's the first part of what's going on in Max that we see. I'm going to show another video that's still from this flashback time that gives us a little bit more info about her as well. So let's watch that. Okay, this scene takes place episode 9 at the 22 minutes and 29 second mark is where it begins. And what it is it is part of that flashback scene. It is prior to the one that we just watched or that I shared about. And it's happening with the girls as they're young, preparing for this lemonade stand. Marcus is kind of off doing his own thing, and Ellen pulls Max aside and asks her, why don't you invite Marcus to help? And she says, because he's a boy. And Ellen says, no, he's your twin. You guys have a special relationship, and you'll always need to look out for each other. And Max says, he kind of needs me, huh? And Ellen nods. And so then Max goes up to Marcus and asks him, do you want to help with the lemonade stand? And Marcus has a delight on his face and he says, okay, Max. Okay, so this scene on its own is actually very sweet, right? Max's mom is teaching her to pay attention to others if they're feeling left out, to invite them in. There was no real harm in that, and it goes really well for them. The reason, though, that this is significant in this show is that it's showing that Max has a certain pressure or expectation to be attuned to Marcus and to make sure that Marcus is okay. So there's this way of relating to him, which on its own isn't bad. But when we combine it with the fact that then Max's own emotions are being dismissed and shamed, that's where it becomes really heavy. There's this experience to be there for her brother, but no one's really there for her. And this is what happens with Max and Marcus, is what's called being the glass child, where Marcus, and I'll go into this more when I talk about Marcus, but Marcus kind of becomes what we call the IP of the family, which stands for the identified problem. So all this attention, and it is negative attention, it's harmful to Marcus as well, but it's all on Marcus, and Max becomes either invisible in her own problems or only seen as needing to help Marcus. So we do see this throughout the show. I'm not going to be showing more of that in this video, but I wanted to show this as the flashback because it's also important to acknowledge that it didn't just start when Max was a teenager. This is something of a pattern that began when Max was really little. So she's growing up with this good girl conditioning, needing to be on her best behavior, needing to be inclusive, and then her own emotions and her own healthy protest being ignored. So all of that's going to increase this anxiety of I'm invisible, my feelings don't matter to my family, I feel shame for my emotions and I don't know how to manage them. I know some of them are valid, but I can't get a grasp on it and it's overwhelming, and there's just so many of them. She's a very deeply feeling person, and that's going to be overwhelming, which is a lot of this personality we see. What comes out as excitable partially is excitable, but it's also partially anxiety. And that if she didn't have so much anxiety, she would still be have a lot of positive energy, but she wouldn't be as high energy, I guess is what I would say. That there would be a little bit more groundedness in her character, but she's just carrying so much anxiety because there's just no space for her. There's no space for her feelings, and it's overwhelming to her in her space, and it's hard for her to be with herself. So I hope that makes sense there. I'm going to go to the next scene of Max, which this is the clip of her racing thoughts. So let's take a look at that scene. Okay, this next scene is the opening scene of episode 9, and it is a scene where Max is in her bedroom and we hear all of her racing thoughts about what she should do, who she should text, and what all the things that she needs to get done. This is a really big scene. If you want to just watch this clip, I also have this scene on my Instagram and my TikTok where I do an analysis of this. This analysis is going to be a little bit longer here. Okay, so in this scene, we're seeing Max has a lot of racing thoughts. And a lot of people are equating this to ADHD. And then there's some OCD, right? We see her switching the light switch and not wanting anyone to die. So there are ADHD symptoms here and there are OCD symptoms here. But from my perspective as a clinician that works with people from complex trauma, so complex trauma is looking at that attachment wounding and really just looking deeply at what's underneath these symptoms. Most people I work with that are struggling with OCD and ADHD, once we get to the root of the underlying anxiety and trauma, these symptoms significantly decrease or go away. So this isn't me saying that the symptoms aren't real, because of course the symptoms are real. And there are some people that have, this isn't true for everyone struggling with these symptoms, but it is true for a lot of people. It is my belief that like ADHD is overdiagnosed as a stagnant thing. There's a lot of people doing coping mechanisms for ADHD instead of healing what's underneath it to really resolve it. And so I'm going to go through why I feel like how this is happening for Max is coming from this underlying trauma. So in the previous in that previous video that we just saw, and we went through when she was a kid, all that anxiety, right? She has all these emotions. She doesn't know how to be with them. She's never been emotionally held. There's a lot of emotional neglect in her family. She's been shamed for her feelings. That naturally causes a lot of anxiety, and her mind is going to just start going pretty quickly because it's hard to slow down and really be with herself. She's had no safe place to land to learn how to do that. That's already who Max is at this point in time. That's already what she's struggling with. Then we have this scene. So for anyone who hasn't seen the show, prior to this scene, Max walked in on Georgia stealing her brother's bike to escape, and then found that Marcus had a bunch of empty alcohol bottles in the garage. There's a lot at stake here. She has a lot of relational dilemmas. She's also already starting to feel rejected by her friends and is afraid that she's going to lose them. And so there's a lot of pressure on her. It's what we call relational dilemmas. And so when we look at these relational dilemmas, they all have a time pressure, right? So there's this question of, should she tell Ginny that she saw her mom escaping? Then she decides that she should. Then how does she get Ginny's attention without pushing Ginny further away? Then there's a question of, should she tell Marcus that she found those bottles? Should she tell her parents that she found the alcohol? Will that make Marcus in more trouble, or will that help Marcus get help? If she doesn't tell her parents about the alcohol, what will happen to Marcus? Then on top of all of that, she has a musical coming up where has a lead role she's preparing for. She has homework that she needs to be working on, and her mom keeps texting her to put the chicken in the oven. That's so much. That is so much for any person to be holding. And so, it's just too much. It's so much pressure. So much is at stake in each of these things. And for someone who's already anxious, who already has a hard time being with herself and has no one to talk to about what's going on. She did text Silver to try and get Silver's attention, and Silver didn't text back. So she's alone with all of this, and it's just too much to manage. And so that's why we get these ping-balling thoughts and these racing thoughts in that moment. And in general, the ADHD symptoms are responding to this underlying anxiety of, I can't sit still in myself. There's too many feelings. It's overwhelming. I'm scared of them. There's shame connected to them. And so I can't be present and still. So my mind is going to need to keep going to different places to distract me from all of this. That's a lot of what's commonly under ADHD. And I definitely think in Max's situation is what's happening for her. Then we have the OCD, where she's doing the light switch. And OCD is also a common symptom when there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of chaos in someone's life, when their life feels really out of control and there's not enough of support or relational security while there's a lot happening. It's an unconscious thing that happens as a protector of sorts to try and feel like you have some semblance of control to what's happening in your life. It's complicated, but that's really what's underneath a lot of OCD. So it makes sense, given how much stress and chaos is going on in Max's life, that she would start to develop some OCD symptoms as well. The last scene I'm going to go to for Max in this video is one with her friends, where she tries to talk about her hurt feelings. So Max is holding all of this. She's all alone, and she's had a lot of feelings, and her friends, they have opposite coping strategies with their feelings. They're overwhelmed, but pushing their feelings away to try and not make contact with their feelings. So when Max is overflowing with her emotions and wanting to talk through her friends' emotions, it's too much for them. And we see this happen in this next scene. I also don't think the way her friends responded was okay. They were really mean. But I'm going to show this video right now, and then we'll talk through it a little bit about my thoughts from my perspective of what's really going on here. Okay, so unfortunately I can't show you the clip, so I'm going to do my best to break this clip down beat by beat because it is an important one. So they are, and I do have my notes here, I'm going to be reading off of them. This scene happens in episode 10 at the 30-minute mark and 50 seconds is where it begins. So if you'd like to watch it, you can go to that place. The scene starts with Abby and Nora sitting in the auditorium waiting for the assembly to start, where Ginny's going to be sharing her award-winning poem. Max comes in and sits right behind them. She says, hey. They both say hey to her, but then they turn around and ignore her. Max then says, Silver and I broke up. And at this point, Abby and Nora turn around. They do really express care of, oh no, I'm so sorry, are you okay? Max says, yeah, I'm okay, it needed to happen. And then Max turns towards Abby and says, what about you, Abby? And Abby goes, look, I know you know about me and Tris. And at this point, we hear that the assembly is starting. Someone in the administration is beginning to address the audience. But Max keeps talking, and she says, why didn't you tell me? And Abby goes into an explanation about how Max can make things a really big deal, and she didn't want this to be a big deal. And Max says, okay, but like I would really like to talk about this. And Abby says, okay, well, maybe I don't want to talk about this. We can hear that the assembly is starting. So Max is now talking over the assembly. Nora says, you guys stop fighting. This is embarrassing. And Max says, I want to get this correct. Max says, my feelings were hurt. I just love you guys so much and I want to fix it. And Abby goes, well, your feelings can be a lot sometimes, Max. And Max is visibly very hurt and upset and stands up and walks out of the auditorium. Okay. So this scene is really sad. It's heartbreaking. And when we look at what's going on, and I'm going to go into Abby's character a little bit more of why she's so shut down with her emotions, but Max has a lot of feelings and it's too much for them. Now, I don't think they handled it well. Abby should have told Max and then expressed like, hey, I just want to let you know I'm dating Tris. I don't want to make it a big deal though. Can you please help me? Can you please honor that and not make it a big deal? But I want to let you know because, I love you. We're good friends. And to have that conversation of how my needs around my relationship and coming out in this queer relationship is different from when Max came out that she liked girls and engaging in a conversation about the needs. That's what should have been healthy. In this scene, though, so when Max initially is talking, it's okay. And then when she leans into, I really miss you guys. I think she's specifically what she said, but I really missed you guys and my feelings have been hurt. At that point, it was no longer the appropriate time to have that conversation. They're at this ceremony. Ginny's about to share this poem. And that is something that Max should have asked for a conversation later. And so that's part of Max's overwhelm with her feelings. That it's so big, it feels like she needs to say this thing right now instead of being able to be like, oof, okay, this feels bad. I'm going to table this and come back to it later so that we can talk through with my friends about what's going on. So because that cup is overflowing and she needs to say it right then, Abby's already in a place of, I don't want to talk about this. And then Max is pushing her. That's where Abby's getting triggered of well, your feelings can be a lot. Because it genuinely is not the appropriate time to even be having that conversation. So it's a both and. Max was inappropriate with it, but Abby was also really rude. And I do believe after this portion, Abby says something "You stop being so dramatic," which is also really mean. And as Max is overflowing and sharing this in this inappropriate moment, Abby could have said something like, "I'm so sorry you're hurting, Max. Let's talk about this later. I want to hear your feelings. Let's talk about this later." That also would have resolved it, right? Where we don't have to make Max's feelings so bad. We don't have to shame her for them. She's already feeling a lot of shame. So this scene though is really having these characters that manage their emotions so differently kind of hit a head, where Abby is almost allergic to her emotions, and I'm going to go into why that is when I get to Abby. And then Max just has so many and needs to express them and talk through them, and it's just misaligned. But it's also Max's trauma. It's both of their traumas, but from looking at Max's trauma is also really impacting the way she's going about talking about this, because she isn't reading the room. She's not making a time to have this conversation. She's not honoring what else is going on around her, because she just doesn't know how to manage and be with the feelings in herself. She's never been held in her feelings. We can imagine in her family, there's never a moment of sadness where those kids get a hug and a, hey baby, it's okay, I'm here, I got you, it's okay to be sad, let's be with these feelings. None of that. And kids need that. They need to know they're held and that there's a soft place to land, and that's how they learn to be with their feelings. And Max never got that. So we see how that then just bubbles up in her with the anxiety of the emotion in itself, the shame of it, wanting it to resolve as quickly as possible because she doesn't know how to be with it, and then it comes out in moments that aren't quite appropriate. So that's Max. I think a lot of people are worried about her in the show because she's so misunderstood, because her friends are, what they're missing is that this bubbling over is happening because she cares about them so much, and she's feeling left out, and she was being left out. And so that's where it becomes really heartbreaking. She's a good person. They're all great people. And that's also what I love about this show, is that they're showing how we all have these survival strategies, these coping mechanisms to deal with pain that might be off-putting to other people, but none of them are malicious. It's just people not knowing how to manage their pain, and all of them really care. They just don't know how to really be present to that, because they're all managing so much within themselves and so much pain with no support about that. So we see that in Max, deeply caring, very misunderstood, and now feeling very alone. Okay, I'm going to move on to Marcus. So Marcus, as Max's twin brother, also had that emotional neglect, right? So the difference between Max and Marcus is that Max is super extroverted. Marcus was very introverted. And we know that he would have watched Max get shamed for her emotions. We can also assume that when Max was very young and in the regular developmental stage, as he had big emotions, he also would have been shamed or redirected for those emotions, that their parents just didn't know how to be genuinely soothing. They would just try to stop their kids from crying or stop their kids from having a tantrum. So Marcus would have learned, there's no point in expressing my feelings. I'm just going to keep them inside, and I'm going to try and just disconnect from them. He also would have learned from that, similar to Max, that there's shame in these emotions. So what this did to Marcus is that he doesn't know, he wouldn't have known how to be with his emotions in the same way that Max doesn't know. And he also would have had a lot of shame about them. But instead of it bubbling up the way it does for Max, he just kind of pushed it down and tried to continuously disconnect, which is also going to lead him more into the depression. It's going to make his affect less expressive, because if he were to expand and express, there's a lot of emotion that would come out with it, right? So the more we repress our emotions, the more people tend to become less expressive, and I'm blanking on the word, but your nervous system starts to go into more of what's called a dorsal vagal collapse, where you're just kind of going through the motions. And a deep depressive state is often a very deep dorsal vagal collapse, where there's just way too much emotion, and the person doesn't know how to deal with it. So the nervous system just shuts down in a way where they don't feel much of the emotion. There'll be a little bit of sadness, but they're not feeling much of anything. their aliveness, the energy gets stifled and it's not moving through anymore. That's a lot of what we see with Marcus. So I'm going to play this first scene and then I'll talk through it a little bit more. Okay, so the scene I was going to show you is from season 1, episode 3 at the 35-minute mark. And it is Ginny and Marcus sitting in the bathroom during a school dance. Marcus is hiding from the school dance. He doesn't want to participate. He's smoking a joint. And they're having a heart-to-heart. And in this moment, Marcus tells Ginny that his friend died from cancer last year. And we can see in Marcus that there's tears in his eyes. There's a lot of sadness in his tone, that he's still really struggling with this death. Okay, so what we're seeing in this scene with Marcus is we see some of that sadness come up because he feels safe with Ginny in that moment. He's been smoking weed to suppress his emotion. And so my hypothesis here about Marcus is that he grew up emotionally neglected. There's not emotional comfort, space to feel his feelings, understand his feelings. He learned to push them away and feel shame about it. And then his friend passes away, and that was too much. He could kind of deal before with the little things that were happening, but his friend dying, when people die, that grief is enormous. It's big grief, and people need space to fully release that. It's deep pain. And that would have been unbelievably overwhelming to a teenager that's never had any comfort or soothing around sadness. It's overwhelming to anybody, even teenagers who do have the comfort, right? But at least a teenager who's had the comfort knows they can go to a parent or a safe person and have support while they're grieving that pain. Marcus didn't have that. There was nowhere or no one for him to go to, nor did he even know that would have been an option because it had never been an option for him. So his body, his nervous system would have just collapsed and to try and shut it all down, to try and push the emotion down and not feel it. And it can do that to an extent, but then he also starts using substances to push it down even more. And yeah, it would just, as it comes up, he doesn't know what to do with it. It's overwhelming. And so the cannabis and the alcohol would help him feel temporarily a little bit better. And especially alcohol, because alcohol can actually, when someone's completely numb, there's a part of what happens when we drink alcohol is it makes you just feel a little bit happier for a very short amount of time. And then as the alcohol wears off, you actually feel more depressed than you even started. So that's also cyclical in the alcohol abuse that we see in Marcus. An important thing that's also happening to Marcus is that he's become what we call in psychology the identified problem of the family. And because his parents don't know how to emotionally attune, and they don't know how to be what's the word here? They don't know how to be emotionally present. They don't know how to hold space for his feelings. When they see him depressed, it scares them, and then he becomes a problem that needs to be fixed instead of their son who's clearly needing a lot of love. And so their response to his depression and his alcohol use is to punish, is to nag him, and is to constantly be on top of him to try and get him to be better. But that is never going to make him better, because what's actually causing the problem is that there's no space, there's no emotionally safe place. And as they continue to nag, what they're telling him is, I don't care that you're sad. I just want you to not be sad. And maybe if you do this thing, then you can at least look like you're not sad. You can at least seem like you're not sad. Now, I think they genuinely wanted him to not be sad as well, right? Like, no parent wants to see their kid depressed, but they just had no capacity to actually meet him and love him through it. They thought the only way to get him through it is to get him to perform accordingly. It's very behaviorally oriented, which is the opposite of what he needed. So I'm going to share one of the videos where we see this happen. Okay, so this clip is in season 3 at the 24-minute and 50-second mark. Marcus is lying on his bed. We can see he's in pain and trying to numb out. Ellen walks into the room and in a chipper voice says, "So I was thinking about tulips and tuxes. It could be fun. And your therapist says that you should try to challenge yourself." And Marcus snaps and says, "God, can everyone just leave me alone?" Ellen says, "You don't need to be nasty." Marcus says, "I'm sorry, it's hard." Ellen shakes her head in defeat and walks out of the room. Okay, so what we're seeing in this moment is the mom is well-intended. She just doesn't know how to connect to her kid. Marcus is in a lot of pain. He's watching something on his bed to just try and dissociate from all the pain that he's in. The mom has no idea how to acknowledge that, how to love him through that. She is just trying to fix it. This is uncomfortable. How do we make this better? So she's like, "Oh, what if you go to tulips and tuxes?" And to him, that is infuriating because it's like, can you not see how much pain I'm in? Do you not care that I'm in so much pain that I don't want to go to that? Can you ask me if I want to go to that? Can you be curious and be like, why don't you want to go to that, right? It's just being told what to do without any curiosity or understanding of what's going on inside of him. And so when he snaps, "Can't you just leave me alone?" But it makes a lot of sense. It's rude. He shouldn't have done it, but it makes sense because there's that misattunement would be so painful. There's this protest of like, can't you please just be loving and soft and like help me understand and just be with this pain? You know, she didn't come in and say, "Marcus, how are you feeling today? You know, there's this dance. How are you feeling about it? What do you want to, do you want to go to the dance? Why not? Can you share a little bit with me?" And then if he's like, no, to say something like, okay, I'll respect that. And I'm sorry you're in so much pain. Like, I really wish I could take your pain away. To just have some empathy. There's no empathy from the mom. Trying to fix it in a way that will feel like judgment. And that's more of that emotional neglect. There's not a true understanding in Ellen that Marcus isn't just clinically depressed as this random pathology. He's in an immense amount of pain. He's depressed because he's pushing down unbelievable amounts of sadness, grief, and anger about a lot of things, including the death of his friend. There's a lot of other things going on, and he doesn't have the capacity or the support to be with that and feel that in himself. So all of that pain is just being pushed down. And it's just completely invisible to his mom, who just thinks it's this random depression thing that we just got to fix by getting you out into the community. So there's such a misattunement here for Marcus that's going to just, and he's being talked to still in this way of like, you're a problem. This thing is a problem in our family. It's a problem to me as Ellen, right? Like, this is a problem I need to fix. So he's going to be taking that into this extra layer of shame. There's something wrong with me. They need me to be better. I don't know what's wrong with me. And it just adds to the layers of shame. I'm going to show one more video about how they're treating him as this problem in the family. And then we're going to go into the big scene that everyone is familiar with where he breaks down. Okay, so this scene is when Marcus is called into the principal's office. It is episode 10 at the 27-minute mark and 35 seconds. And he's pulled into the principal's office. When he arrives, he sees that his parents are there waiting. The principal lets them all know that Marcus's grades are not good enough for him to graduate with his class, to move forward to the next grade. Marcus's dad immediately says in sign language, "What's wrong with you? Why?" Marcus responds, "Maybe I'm just dumb, Dad." The principal then informs them that if Marcus does summer school, that he still might be able to catch up and graduate with his class. And Ellen immediately says, yes, he'll do that. The principal then softens and says, I also want to check in. Is anything else going on? And Ellen immediately says, no. We'll keep an eye on him and he'll do summer school. Okay, so this scene here, so Marcus hasn't been keeping up with his grades, which is a really common thing to happen when teenagers are struggling emotionally, especially when they're in as much pain as Marcus is in. School starts to feel like absolutely stupid. Like it's hard to focus on anything because there's so much energy in the body to not make contact with the emotion that to stay focused to anything else becomes really hard. And it starts, when there's that much pain, doing school starts to feel really trivial and unimportant. So this is a really common thing that we see with teens who are struggling with depression. And instead of having any ounce of care or empathy in this meeting, the dad says, what's wrong with you? Shaming him for not doing his work, not staying on top of his work. Then I'm not actually sure who that woman was, if that's the principal or a counselor, but the woman who works for the school that's talking to them, she says, is anything going on? And that's another opportunity for them to soften with compassion and say, Marcus has been having a hard time emotionally and we're getting him help. And we're going to talk to him and see what we can do to help him. They completely push it under the rug. Everything's fine, which is going to tell Marcus again, there's shame about him. There's shame about his depression and that he's struggling. They're not acknowledging anything, and we'll take care of this, as in Marcus is going to correct himself and do better. Again, with zero care for how much pain and the humanity of Marcus in this moment. That's going to really hurt him. So all of this combined is going to lead to self-hatred. He already doesn't know how to be with his emotions. There's shame already for his emotions. As that collapses on itself and brings him into a depression, he's shamed for his depressive symptoms. He's nagged constantly. There's this constant feeling of you're disappointing us. What's wrong with you? All of this will just lead him into further shame and self-hatred, which is what we end up seeing. And I am going to play this scene. Okay, so this scene is one that I really wish I could play here, but this is the scene where Marcus goes into the I hate me statements. So Max brings Marcus home from the party. He's very drunk. The parents are there waiting. Marcus senses their disappointment and starts drunkenly interacting and defending himself. Ellen then says, "What's wrong with you? Do you hate us?" And Marcus leans down next to her and says, "No, I don't hate you. I hate me." And he says it over and over. I hate me. I hate me. I hate me. And then he falls to the ground in emotion. His dad goes onto the ground to help Marcus stand back up and walks Marcus up to his room. Max is seen visibly upset, understandably, and scared. She comes up to her mother and she says, "Mom, he has a problem. He needs help. He needs rehab." And Ellen is shaken in this moment and says, "I don't want him to fall behind." And Max says, "Who cares if it means he's helping himself?" And Ellen says, "He's already having a hard enough time, Max, and I don't want to make it worse." And Max is very upset and walks away. Okay, so the scene is heartbreaking. It also makes a lot of sense based on everything that we've seen from Marcus and everything that I've said leading up to this point. Of course he hates himself. The amount that he has felt rejected, that they're disappointed by him, that the amount that he's been shamed by them, and the lack of emotional support, care, compassion, and empathy for what he's going through is going to lead to that self-hatred. What, for me, is the most heartbreaking about this scene is that as he's saying, I hate me, he falls to his knees crying. And his dad goes down for a second. And for a moment, it's like, oh my gosh, his dad's going to give him a hug. No, he doesn't. He goes down to lift Marcus up and help Marcus walk to his room. And that is just such a sad moment. And it's so telling. Marcus is sobbing. He's in this drunken, low state, being able to make contact with this emotion. And what he needed was his dad to get on the floor with him and bring him into his arms and just hold him while Marcus cried. But they couldn't do that. Both of them couldn't do that. They just, they pass it off as like Marcus is being dramatic and we're just gonna redirect you upstairs, which is going to be just as heartbreaking again for Marcus. And then as Max says he needs help, it's like they can't even understand. They're so emotionally disconnected from themselves that this idea that there's emotional needs outside of falling behind school that needs attention, that is more important than him falling behind in school, it's like they can't even grasp it. Luckily, they eventually do, and he does go to rehab. But in that moment, you really get to see how disconnected Ellen is from her own emotions and from empathy of pain, that she cannot understand that this is not just a behavioral issue, that there is a lot of emotional pain that needs healing. Another piece I want to bring up here with Marcus in him being this identified problem is that often in psychology, what we see is that in families where there's multiple siblings and one of them is the identified problem, one of the reasons that happens is that the parents' relationship is not going well. And instead of dealing with that, they direct their energy into a child. And as that child remains a problem, they don't have to encounter the relational struggles with themselves. And so what's really interesting is that with Max and Marcus's parents, we never see them argue or fight. They always get along, but we never see them have a relational, intimate moment. We don't see any love or sweetness or romance or kissing or soft touch or like falling into each other's embrace. They're very cold with each other as well. And so that brings, and the show shows that with other people. We see that with Georgia and her partners. We see that with Zion and his girlfriend. We see other characters be loving and sweet with each other, and we don't see that at all with Max and Marcus's parents. And so it brings me into question of like what's really going on in that relationship. Is that just who they are, or is there actually some tension that they're not showing their kids, and so it's not being shown to us as an audience, but then some of that tension is just being redirected into making sure their kids are perfect and behaving versus being able to really be attuned to their emotional needs. Okay, the last one I'm going to go into is Abby. So we know that Abby is struggling with an eating disorder. She's been making herself vomit and she's not eating very much. We also know that her parents have divorced. Her dad, she doesn't see her dad often. He met a new woman really quickly. She moved in with him very quickly. And then her mom has been drinking a lot and been really emotionally neglectful. So there's abandonment and neglect all at one time. What I found very interesting about the show, and I was glad they showed this, is that in the flashback, they show when Abby's dad comes in, they show that she's super happy to see him. He picks her up and spins her around. So we can see that there's a really, really deep bond. And so what that means is that she was a daddy's girl, and then he left. That abandonment is going to hit her extra hard because she loved him. She adored him, and then he's just gone. So I'm only going to show one clip of Abby, but I feel like this clip gives us a lot of information, and then I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so in this scene, Nora brings Abby home from the dance early because Abby is really drunk. When they get into her room, Nora says, "How did you get so drunk?" And Abby says, "I don't know. It's probably because I haven't eaten all day." Then Abby's mom comes in very upset and says, "What is wrong with you?" Abby snarkily responds, "Excellent question, Nancy." Nancy says, "This is unacceptable." And Abby goes into a speech where we can hear a lot of pain in her voice. And she goes, "Oh, please, you're probably more drunk than I am right now. You're a mess. Dad left and you just fell apart. You just crumbled into a million pieces and it wasn't fair. I missed you and I really needed you and I really missed Dad. You became pathetic and embarrassing." Nancy says, "Don't you speak to me like that, Abigail. I am your mother." And Abby goes, "Yeah, well, you don't act like it." And her mother just walks away. Nora comes up to Abby, gives her a big embrace, and Abby just falls apart into deep crying pain. Okay, so this scene with Abby and Nora is really emotional. It's heartbreaking. And it gives us a lot of information about why Abby has been acting and struggling in the ways that we've seen. So, I'm also an eating disorder specialist. I work with eating disorders. And so we know that these attachment wounds deeply impact how teenage girls specifically relate to their bodies. And specifically with her dad, where she's feeling actually abandoned by her dad, and she loved him so much that would be unbelievably heartbreaking and overwhelming. It would also feel like a rejection. So there's two pieces here. One is that when teenage girls feel rejected by either of their parents, but we do find that it can have a greater impact with the father, they naturally, like in this trauma state, their attention is going to go to their body and to try and find belonging and acceptance and to be desired and loved by someone outside the family. But they're really insecure about themselves because of the rejection of their own parents. And so that insecurity leads them to feel an extra need to change their bodies in order to be accepted by others. So we see that going on. In addition, her mom has been emotionally neglectful. Her mom has been drinking a lot and not there at all for Abby. So what this does is Abby is feeling both this abandonment and rejection by both her parents, which in itself is overwhelming. It's an overwhelming amount of pain. There's that attachment and love with our parents. Even if you don't like your parents, there's a love there and you expect to be loved back. And when that isn't happening, it's unbelievably heartbreaking. So we have that piece. And then there's no safe person for her to feel that emotion. So there's this overwhelm of grief and pain and know where to fall apart and help to process it through. And so another thing with eating disorders that we see is that the eating disorder behavior, whether it's not eating, binging, or vomiting, all of it has a nervous system regulatory component. And specifically not eating much, it can help people distance themselves from their emotion to be able to keep operating in their day. And so Abby is overwhelmed with this emotion. She wouldn't be able to operate. She would potentially, without the eating disorder, be more like Marcus. But the eating disorder is almost disconnecting her enough for her to continue to operate in her world. Because if she were to relax and have the nervous system relax and connect back into her body, there would be way too much emotion and it would be overwhelming. The other thing here is that when there's that much emotion, the body can go into this dorsal vagal collapse where the body, the nervous system becomes so activated that it's not in a rest and digest state. So it can genuinely feel harder to eat because the body is in this survival state where it doesn't want food, right? So if we were actually being chased by a tiger and we needed to run, our body would not want us to eat. It needs us to just keep moving, right? So our body recognizes a threat, and sometimes it can turn off our hunger and turn off our ability to digest as a way to, because it thinks we're under threat. And so in these kinds of situations, that might be happening with Abby because there's so much emotional unsafety and abandonment that the threat, her body wouldn't even be as hungry or wanting that food. And then the not eating is going to help her in her regulating because there's so much dysregulation if she connects back into her body. And then the belonging piece and feeling rejected and then feeling like if she changes her body, maybe then she'll be loved. All of that is piling onto itself. And then we can also see, because there's so much emotion and not enough holding, that she is pushing away all her feelings because there's just too much. And so that's why we see her as like allergic to her feelings, right? We see Abby's like, I don't want to talk about my feelings. I don't want to talk about your feelings because it's just too much. And there's also going to be a lot of shame. As both of her parents have pulled away, naturally, the instinct of a child or adolescent is to shame themselves for that, to feel like there must be something wrong with me, that my parents don't love me anymore. And so there's a part of them that can see like, how dare you walk away? And there's a part of them that's like, is it me? Is it because something's wrong with me? And all of that's going to be way too much to handle. And so she's not going to want to touch into emotion because there's too much shame and too much overwhelm that's underneath there. So that's where we see in Abby her constantly not wanting to talk about emotion, kind of being snarky about emotion, which is the opposite of Max, who's just overflowing and needing to process her emotion. And then those two are just in these complete opposite survival strategies of how to deal with not having the emotional support that they need. And that's where they're really hitting ahead. Okay, that is the end of the content for this video. I hope it was helpful. Would love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. I'm going to be making more videos like this. And a reminder that if you're looking to understand your own healing process, I have that mini course available. It's just $27 called The Roots of Healing, and the link is below. All right, I'll see you guys later.